Good afternoon. Thanks to all of you for joining us today for our media webinar featuring our Executive Director, Dr. Karissa Niehoff. My name is Bruce Howard, Director of Publications and Communications at the NFHS. And since we may have some first-time attendees to our session today, I wanted to briefly tell you a little bit about the NFHS and the work that we do here. The NFHS is the national organization for high school sports and performing arts programs, serving 19,500 high schools, 51 state associations, and involving more than 12 million student participants, both in athletics and performing arts. Over our now 102 years, our chief task has been the writing of playing rules for the 17 high school sports for boys and girls, but we do much more now, including our online education courses for coaches and officials, parents, students, and others, and ensuring that students have that opportunity to enjoy healthy participation, achievement, good sportsmanship, and education-based athletics. Just a few housekeeping points before we get going today. This session may be recorded. And the recording of the session will be available on our YouTube channel following, and the audio video files are also available upon request. And live streaming of the windows is permitted on Zoom. And if you would, while Dr. Niehoff begins our session today, if you would place your questions in the Q&A, we will come back and get as many of those answered on the topics that she's going to be discussing today. As soon as she concludes, we'll get back to and answering your questions. We are looking at 4 basic topics today that she'll be covering: a number of some culture and religious issues and some of our playing rules that have occurred recently, the recent passage of the shot clock by state association adoption in the sport of basketball, and also the vaccine eligibility for high school students as the vaccine becomes available, is now available for students in that age category as we look to the fall. And then we'll conclude with our football campaign that we're starting this week. This is high school football. Again, we're thankful for your attendance today. Our staff, Chris Boone, our Assistant Director in our department, will be directing your questions to Dr. Niehoff as soon as she begins the session today. And also working here with us is our Manager of Media Relations, Cody Porter, and Nate Perry, our Coordinator of Media Relations. So at this time, I want to turn it over to Dr. Karissa Niehoff, our Executive Director of the NFHS, to begin our media session today. Karissa?
Thank you, Bruce, very much. And thank you to the team. These sessions are important to us. I'd like to start with a thank you to all of you in the media profession. One of the things that we like to do whenever we can interact with you, especially live, is express our gratitude for the work that you do. We know that it's not easy. We know that it's often thankless with tight timelines and efforts to get the whole story. And we really want to thank you for all that you have done throughout the pandemic in particular. You've stayed in touch with us and you've kept our stories alive. You've kept people connected, and we were just thrilled to be able to stay in communication with all of you. So thank you for all that you do, supporting high school education-based athletics and activities, and thanks for being here today. Today we plan to cover 4 topics in particular. What I'd like to do is offer a few remarks about each of the 4 up front, and then certainly allow for as many questions and answers as possible following the introductory remarks. The 4 topics that we'll be talking about with you today are recent rules questions about the role of race and culture. As Bruce said, the state adoption option now for the shot clock, looking at the high school vaccination eligibility issue for high school students, and of course, the football campaign that we're very excited about. So I'll start right away with looking at the role of race and culture in the consideration of rules development here at the NFHS. As you all well know, over the last few years in particular, we've had some situations arise where a young student athlete has had a challenge regarding religious headwear or perhaps beads worn in the hair. And there have been some tough situations for our kids when they've had to remove the headwear, not participate. Some have even gone as far as cutting the beads out of the hair. What we want to do is make sure that we are in communication with all of you about the rules process and the role that race and culture might play. So as Bruce said, for 102 years of our existence, our real central focus has been writing rules. And when we do write sport rules, the first thing that we look to consider is the type of equipment that's necessary to play a particular sport. What are the implements that are used? What is the protective equipment? What's the nature of the sport itself in terms of physical exertion and potential contact with others? So we look at equipment. We also look at uniform. What's the appropriate uniform that kids have to wear? And how do officials need to be able to officiate that game? How do they have to see the uniform, the colors, the numbers, and the visibility? So those two issues are really central to the rules process. Rules are then developed around risk minimization. So how does equipment need to be addressed in terms of keeping kids safe? How do uniforms need to be worn so that kids can play, officials can officiate, and they can still remain safe? What we've seen most recently is the request of participants to bring other components into the game. They might be headwear, it might be items worn in the hair, it might be jewelry, it might be other kinds of attachments to a helmet, for example, or to a particular, like a heart monitor. So there's a device that might be worn, even attachments onto the shoes or the footwear. All of those kinds of things, while not necessary to play the sport, might be important to a young person's identity. So we have to look at how there might be potential risk if something is worn, how it might compromise the fit of a piece of equipment, and whether or not health and safety would be at risk. So the most recent example that we've learned about was the wearing of beads in the hair of a softball player. Our softball rules right now do not permit the wearing of beads in the hair. And this rule goes back to 2012. So it's been around for a number of years. While I was not a part of the NFHS in 2012, the history that I've been able to secure is that there was a concern about beads being a hard item when woven into the hair and close to the scalp might compromise the fit of a helmet, or if, unfortunately, a player were hit with a ball or other implement, would the bead actually exacerbate the potential risk of damage to the head? So those were some of the considerations many years ago. What we've started to do within our rules committees of late is have a harder, deeper conversation about alleged risk of injury, whether or not there's data to support it in the sports medicine community, and the actual impact on a young person's ability to participate fully from an identity perspective. So another way to put that would be if any of our sport rules might prohibit someone or preclude someone from full participation because they can't wear a uniform that's appropriate for their culture, such as a hijab covering the head, or in some cases beads woven in the hair, or even in the Native American culture, for example, the wearing of feathers. So our rules committees now, which operate on a cycle throughout the calendar year, are considering some of those other adornments that might be reflective of religion or culture. And in fact, are making modifications to rules, assuming that the risk to the student wearing the item or the opponents would not be significant so that those things would be prohibited. So we've seen some changes in the sport of volleyball, for example, with the wearing of the hijab. And in fact, our softball rules committee will be meeting from June 14th to June 16th of this year. And I know that the wearing of beads is in fact on the list of, on the agenda for consideration. So the NFHS in our efforts to be a learning organization and one that's founded on a base of inclusion, is striving to work with our young participants in our effort to celebrate the beautiful diversity that continues to increase. And we're excited about that. We want to support that. And while we will always strive to keep kids safe and keep games playing as they were designed to be played, we do want to bring to the table the importance of young persons' identities. So that's a little bit about where we are with race and culture and how it informs rules. If there are any questions, of course, at the end about the rules process, or in fact, consideration of race and culture, we'll be happy to take your questions. The second item that we wanted to talk with you about today was the recent adoption of the state adoption option using the basketball shot clock. So as you may have seen, the NFHS Board of Directors voted to approve the state adoption of the use of a shot clock, a 35-second shot clock in the sport of basketball, beginning with the 22-23 academic year. So that would leave one gap year from now to that state adoption option. We currently have 9 states that have been using an experimentation process with the shot clock. Prior to the Rules Committee meeting most recently, those states that were using the shot clock actually completed a 46-question survey about their own perception of the implementation of that experiment, how it changed the game, how it might have impacted financial situations for schools, how it impacted the training of officials, and in fact, how it was welcomed or not in terms of the impact on the game. The results of those surveys was brought right to the Rules Committee conversation. And as can be assumed, the Rules Committee voted to allow for state adoption of the shot clock in 22-23. That approval then went to the NFHS Rules Review Committee, which includes our sport rules directors. So you have a broad perspective of leadership representing many sports, because as naturally, if one particular sport adopts a certain rule, then naturally other sports would need to keep their eyes on that and ask the question, would this rule change affect my sport? So the Rules Review Committee voted to move that adoption option forward to the Board of Directors, and the NFHS Board of Directors recently voted to approve the state adoption of the shot clock, again in the 22-23 academic year. We have gotten lots of attention about that. Certainly it caused our social channels to be challenged, a lot of great interaction out there in social media. And we're excited to see how states choose in terms of moving in one direction or the other. So that was the second option that we wanted to talk with you on the agenda today. The third topic for conversation is the notion of vaccine eligibility for high school students in terms of their participation in sport or other activities. Just yesterday, I happened to catch our Secretary of Education, Dr. Miguel Cardona, in an interview he did with CNN, and they were very pointed in their questions about whether or not school-aged children should be required to be vaccinated when going back to school. And Dr. Cardona was pretty clear in emphasizing that we should base decisions based on science, what's coming out of the CDC, what might be coming out of local health agencies, what's being responsive in terms of local situations in terms of COVID contagion and numbers. And of course, the importance of the decision being made at a local level. So the NFHS will not be certainly requiring that high school student athletes be vaccinated for COVID-19. We anticipate that state associations will work in conjunction with their state health agencies, consider the science, and also work with their state legislative and education bodies. So at this point, I don't foresee that student athletes would be required to be vaccinated. But again, we will look to see what decisions are made at local and, of course, state levels. We are excited that the vaccine is available and is becoming available for increasingly younger students. And we encourage folks out there to do what they can to embrace as many risk minimization strategies as possible so that we all can get back to school and back to sport and back to performing arts, feeling confident that we are committed to risk minimization as much as we can be. The fourth and final topic for the agenda today with you all is introducing our new actual formal campaign about high school football. Recently, the NFHS and the NFL entered into a partnership that essentially involves the NFL supporting the NFHS with significant funding to do three most important things. The first is to create a position in our office, senior consultant for high school football, and we have done that. Mr. Ed Passano, who had 16 years of experience with USA Football, is now serving in that role. He hit the ground running in January and has made tremendous strides in terms of advancing the campaign, working with a research project that we have underway, and making valuable connections with the football community of all ages nationwide. The second piece that the NFL funding is helping to support is very sophisticated research into participation and perception trends. Our national research project, which has been developed by the UpMetrics group, is surveying student athletes who are currently playing high school football, or even those kids that have chosen to discontinue playing. We're also surveying coaches and athletic directors, parents, and officials. And the survey data, it's anonymous, but what we're able to do with that data is capture live and in heat map format where responses are coming in across the nation. We're able to disaggregate the data and build out some pretty, I'll call them pretty slick visuals that show the demographic responses to all of the questions about why we play, what challenges we have to playing, what our concerns are, and what the values of a football program and experience can be for individuals, for coaches, for families, and for communities. We're hoping to use this data to get the message out about what's most recent in terms of the voice of those involved, our own sports medicine data through the Rio system, and help to kind of recapture the leadership of that message about all of the steps that have been taken to try to make the sport of high school football as safe as it can be over the last number of years. The third thing that the NFL funding is supporting is this campaign. The NFHS is working with the 360 group here in Indianapolis, and starting this week, in fact, we're going to be rolling out the hashtag This is High School Football campaign. One of the significant elements of that campaign is that we will be providing for free to folks interested a marketing toolkit, which includes a logo packet with a number of really neat sayings about the value of participation and the value of the sport and what we learn in the sport. You'll be seeing in a few moments a really nice video developed by our football staff here in the office, Bruce Howard and his team on the call, and the folks from our Learning Center who develop the online resources we have and over 80 plus courses we have in that platform right now. So we'll be having a lot of messaging, advocacy for signing up for the sport, where you can find resources, and some nice tools for schools to use to build the energy in their communities. So what I'd like to do now is invite our staff to share with you the video that we have that we will be releasing, and then some information about how to access that video for your benefit. Cody?
There are very few traditions in our country as enduring, engaging, and meaningful as high school football on Friday nights. Every Friday night in the fall, about 7,000 high school football games involving more than 1 million student athletes are held from coast to coast. Football has been a part of our nation's high schools for more than 100 years. High school football fosters a strong sense of community. It is the most popular boys' sport and is our nation's #1 spectator sport. The people in the stands aren't just fans. They're moms and dads, grandparents, sisters and brothers. They're local store owners and neighbors from down the street. They're former players and coaches, and their fellow students. Win or lose, their support and pride for their school and community are always there. Why play high school football? High school football equips young people for success in both the classroom and in life by inspiring character, leadership, resilience, teamwork, discipline, physical fitness, time management, community engagement, and other important life skills. Also through football, students develop essential skills for participating in other sports during the winter and spring seasons. The sport of football provides opportunities for students with any skill and size. The relationships, bonds, and camaraderie built both on and off the field will last a lifetime. The health and safety of students is a paramount goal of high school football. Like other contact sports, there is an inherent risk in playing football. However, the NFHS wants parents to know that we believe high school football is safer today than it ever has been. The following steps have been taken to create a safer high school football experience. Concussion awareness and management protocols for football. Education and professional development for football coaches. Football injury surveillance and research studies. Restrictions on helmet-to-helmet contact hits and blindside blocks. Limits on contact in football practice. Risk minimization focus by the NFHS Football Rules Committee. Ongoing improvements in football equipment. Emergency action plans and AEDs in place and ready to use in schools nationwide. As it has been for many years, high school football continues to be a significant part of communities across the country. The NFHS is committed to keeping the lights on and keeping the game as safe as possible for the millions of kids who will play for years to come. Contact your local middle school or high school to learn more and sign up to play football today.
Thank you very much, Cody. And I will say for our media folks, the video is a little bit choppy in translation to all of you, but when viewed with direct connection to the link, it's smooth and it's nice. And we hope that it has captured some messaging that can kind of restore some confidence for parents in letting their kids engage with the game. And we always like to message that the sport of football has a place for everyone. And it's one of those few remaining sports that somebody can truly pick up, for the first time when they enter high school. So we hope that this campaign generates a lot of energy. And for any of you that are out there on Friday nights under the lights covering the game, we hope that it's exciting for you to take advantage of as well. If you have information on the campaign that you need, please contact us or contact your local schools in your area. They'll be receiving the marketing toolkit. They'll be receiving web ads and flyers, and of course, the link to the videos. So stay tuned for more info on that. And with that, Bruce, I'll turn it over to you and to the team. I've concluded my remarks and appreciate everyone's patience, and we'll move to the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Karissa. I think we have a few questions in our Q&A. If you have any more, please put them in there, and I'll turn it over to Chris Boone, who will come out to give you some of the questions that we have in there so you can address. Chris?
Great, thank you, Bruce, and thanks, Karissa. Yeah, as Bruce said, just if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll address them either with Karissa or type you an answer. But the first question, Karissa, comes from Nick Stevens. He asks about participation data, and he mentions a couple of surveys in North Carolina from athletic directors that have shown a decline in participation due to COVID. And despite some of the reopening and restrictions loosening, they're still seeing a drop in teams. About a third have dropped to varsity sport, 2/3 have dropped at least to JV sport. He wants to know if the NFHS is collecting any data this year about participation and how serious of an issue is declining participation at a national level. And then he asks, girls sports have been hit particularly hard, particularly basketball. And he said, we talk a lot about football. Do you think it's enough attention is given to girls sports?
Great questions, Nick. Appreciate those, and certainly appreciate all the things happening out in North Carolina. So I think we will be collecting participation numbers. Our typical participation survey has been, I'll say, upgraded. We've revisited that, and we've got some more questions included in a new technology format that will allow us to disaggregate data better. I think this year we'll also be going after the reasons behind what might have been non-participation, probably COVID impact. I will tell you that I don't think we will see a clean, quick return to normal across state associations. I think the return to normal from COVID will take probably 2 years, and it won't be perhaps until the fall of 22, maybe even the fall of 23, that we see what's hopefully a restoration of the programs that were there prior to the pandemic. I think in terms of cutting of programs, some of that could have been financial, some of that could have been there's still hesitancy to get back. So I think there are a lot of reasons that play into that, and they're very real. Across the country, we're seeing certainly reduction in seasons if they had them at all, replacing where the seasons occurred. And another reason for a reduction in participation could have been if seasons were overlapping and some student athletes that typically doubled in, let's say, a winter and spring, and both occurred in the spring, they had to make a choice. So I think there are a lot of reasons why numbers could be skewed, and we will try to get to the bottom of those numbers. I don't know how well we're going to be able to do, because it's tough for schools to really nail down. Is it just hesitancy on the part of students and families? Is there some other reason? But we'll do our best to try to bring you all some numbers at the conclusion of this academic school year. In terms of girls' sports, do we pay enough attention? We're trying. I can tell you we've got a Title IX internal team here, not only looking at what we can do to highlight what Title IX has inspired for the last 49 years, but certainly how we go about working collaboratively with other sports groups to make sure that the young ladies' journeys from engagement through scholastic competition, perhaps to engagement beyond high school, is one that feels equitable. And we all know that equity isn't necessarily exactly equal, but do opportunities exist that are equitable? Numbers of opportunities, support for those opportunities. So we stand strongly on a platform that equity is just something that should be non-negotiable. We try to provide resources when questions arise. And internally, we continue to celebrate the increase in girls' participation numbers. I will tell you, watch out for girls' flag football. It is growing quickly. Girls' wrestling has increased. You may know that girls' volleyball has in fact surpassed girls' basketball in terms of overall participation nationwide. So final remark on that, and I apologize for being long-winded, where we do see decline in girls' participation, basketball, for example, and you mentioned that, we're trying to work with national governing bodies, USA Basketball, youth programming, even the NCAA, to talk about what is that phenomenon of the experience. Is there negativity driving decline? Is there just a choice to do something else? What's behind that? So we are in active conversations and relationships with other groups that might be experiencing those dynamics as well.
Very good, thank you. Got a couple of shot clock questions here. The first one was basically just what were the states that were using the shot clock, if you could list those, and then the survey that those states took and offered insight on how the shot clock impacted the strategy of the game and so forth. What was the impact, and how have strategies changed from that survey information?
Great. So I'm going to look to my other screen here because Cody teed it up for me. So that the states that were using the shot clock as experiment, and again, this will be recorded, so if I speak too quickly, forgive me. California, DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, South Dakota, and Washington State. Those were the states using it as experiment. We've gotten word in the wind that some other states are interested in going now that it's state adoption. So we'll see how that plays out. They have a year to kind of prepare themselves. Those states using it as an experiment, as you may know, they have a 3-year term limit on that. There may be a few states that would have to go back to either using it without exercising a vote should they be on the committee. I don't believe any of those states are in that position. But otherwise, there's a gap year there for those that choose to continue to use it. But we'll all find out as states make their decisions. In terms of impact on the game, I can tell you that the rules committee, the basketball rules committee, which is the very first level of conversation, they passed the adoption. I believe the vote was 11-1. So the survey results, and I did not see them, I was not present at the meeting. The survey results, in my mind, influenced the committee to say the feedback was positive. What we have heard up until this point was a concern that, especially at developmental levels, perhaps a freshman JV level, a shot clock would infuse a sense of urgency that might impact execution on the court. That's been one concern. Other concerns have been financial. You know, the shot clock adoption implies necessitating 2 devices with a separate horn that's attached to a separate scoring device or timing device. You need someone who's trained in implementing those devices to be at the table. They're probably going to need a fee to work the game. Then you're going to need to do some training with your officials in your state. So the finances, the logistics behind the adoption process has been a concern. So we still, until this year, there's not been at all a national trend toward national adoption, but the state adoption gives states the option of doing that. There have been pros and cons that I mentioned, but the feedback on the survey was that there was not essentially significant disruption to the playing of the game. And it was enough to influence our rules committee to move in a majority direction.
Excellent. Yeah. A couple other shot clock questions is, do we have any guess or anticipation of how many will actually adopt the shot clock in 2022, 23?
Oh, that's good. This is going to be pure supposition here, only based on reaction to the release, you know, just a short while ago. I would guess maybe 4 to 6. There have been some that have been talking about it. There's been some energy. We do know that there are some that are a little frustrated by the adoption option because there's been some pressure from other groundswells, you know, hey, let's go. It's an option. Let's do this thing. So the year in between is significant. So state associations can gauge where their member schools are and try to reach the best end for them. But I don't think we're going to see a groundswell of adoption for the various reasons I mentioned, but who knows? I could be completely wrong. And I could be wrong with the 4 to 6 option. For those states that were not already experimenting, perhaps no one will be interested, but I think we'll see a few anyway. And I stand already corrected. Should I be wrong, I'll do another media availability session and catch the tomatoes. But you know, we'll do our best to keep you all informed.
Very good. You kind of touched on this earlier, but maybe talk a little more about why the state adoption was used instead of a national rule for the shot clock. And do you see in the future that a national rule may be mandatory for a shot clock?
Yeah, so we're a member-driven organization, and our rules committee process is member-driven. So every year, the committee the membership really has access to a rules survey, and officials, coaches, athletic directors, state associations can submit through the state association office suggestions for rules proposals. The state association office sends those up to the rules committee, the NFHS Rules Committee. The Rules Committee allots a significant amount of time in their meeting agenda to go through all of the different proposals that they may get. They weigh the pros and cons. And the committee, by the way, I should remind folks, is made up of state association representation, coaching representation, and officials representation. So you have the voices in the room. They weigh the pros and cons for each of the proposals, and then they arrive at a committee option to vote on, and then they take their vote. So really then, beyond the Rules Committee, again, it goes to our Rules Review Committee. A vote is made there. Then it goes to the NFHS Board of Directors. So really, our office does not make these decisions. So will the membership go in a national shot clock as a rule direction? Who knows? Because it's been such a divisive issue historically, this is pretty significant that it reached the state adoption option level. And I think the idea there is to give states the opportunity to implement it if they really think it's important and have the means to do it. But if we make it a national rule that you must use a shot clock, all of a sudden now there are philosophical things that might be challenging. There are necessitation of equipment, training, staffing, some things that state associations and schools may not necessarily be ready to do. So that's a little bit about how we do it, and will it ever? I don't know, we'll see. But I can tell you the process is solid and it has worked for a long time. So if the membership communicates to the board of directors in the future that it's time for a national shot clock, the board will weigh that. And they generally do respond in alignment with membership voice. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's very good, thank you. The next question is regarding the playing rules dealing with cultural and racial issues. What modifications do you foresee could happen to the rule that prohibits adornments such as beads? How likely is the removal of this rule? And was there any injury data that supported implementing the rule when it was first put in place in 2012?
Great question. There was no sports medicine injury data that I could find that would have been a piece of that decision. I would assume back then it was probably in consideration of the fact that beads are hard and could they pose a risk. It was probably in communication with our Sports Med Advisory Committee, there was probably affirmation that beads could pose a risk. And if it's not necessary for the playing of the game, or in this case, if beads are not necessary for hair restraint and another soft device could in fact restrain hair, that was probably a part of the conversation. I personally couldn't find injury data related to wearing of beads in any of the sports that we've received inquiries for. So when the softball committee meets, I know that they will be considering whether or not the beads rules should be changed. I'll offer my personal opinion is that based on the trends in other rules committees, the cultural conversation is really going to be significant. And I think it's going to bring a very important additional element in the room. And there will be a lot of empathy around the table. So I can't predict what the conversation will be, but based on where other rules committees have gone, and that's in the direction of modification, my sense is we could likely see modification of that rule. We don't have the data to indicate that the wearing of beads in softball would pose another risk. Some sports with a little more physical contact, a little bit more aggression, assertion, person to person, it could still be a concern. Track and field has no statement about beads. It's different individual sports. So we might see a little bit of a difference across the board, which, is important. But we'll see. We have trended towards, a more informed conversation and a celebration really of who these kids are and not wanting anybody to feel embarrassed or demeaned or in fact not welcomed or included.
Thank you. Real quick, going back to the shot clock, another question came in asking if the shot clock will be the same for both boys and girls, and if the survey that was sent to states took into effect gender differences for the game in terms of boys and girls basketball.
Good question. So right now it is a shot clock adoption by the state. Not that we've seen this happen, but there could be a situation. There could be. Well, we actually have seen experiments with the boys basketball adopting a shot clock, girls not. But it's up to the state to choose what they would want to do. It could be likely that the boys coaches, the school membership voice says boys coaches collectively would like to implement, girls not, vice versa. But right now our rule modification is for the sport of basketball. So we'll see where states go. It would probably behoove states to do boys and girls to get a better sense of how both games are impacted. The survey did go to state associations where both were in experimentation. So we did get feedback from both boys and girls programs. I don't know specific responses from that survey, so I can't speak any more deeper into the weeds in that, but both boys and girls programs were surveyed and provided feedback.
Very good, thank you. Once again, if there's any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. I think one more that we may have is the outlook for football this fall in the country with our football campaign starting. What is the outlook and what do you think attendance will look like?
Well, I think there's absolutely a hunger to get back to high school football, the Friday night community event, the spirit that football engenders within a school, across student populations, and of course throughout a community. The hunger's there. We're working with our state associations that perhaps had a spring season to be extra mindful of preseason conditioning as kids move from spring into summer, perhaps into a fall full slate of competitive competitive schedule, looking at equipment reconditioning. I think states are absolutely committed to getting kids back into condition, getting them back into connection, and getting them back into competition. We would like to think that we're going to see where states are back to school, where we have the numbers back on the roster. We're going to see full seasons. That's our hope. That's the energy that we're sensing. That's the level of education our states have demonstrated. Their commitment to risk minimization just was always there. But the coaches in schools were phenomenal through this pandemic about doing what they had to do to keep kids safe, modifying seasons. They would do whatever they could to play. So I think the hunger and the energy there are going to drive a return that's attentive, supportive, and successful.
Absolutely. Real quick, the shot clock again. In terms of the process for states adopting the shot clock, is there a deadline for states to decide if they'll adopt the shot clock or not? Or how does that process work?
That's a great question. The adoption is something that can begin in the 22-23 school year. States may choose to go in that direction, but it's not mandatory that they start then. It just means that's when the rule kicks in. So, and the reason that date is significant in terms of rule is that if they should happen to sit on our basketball rules committee, and they are in fact adopting the shot clock, they still have a vote. Instead of having no option for a shot clock, using a shot clock, and not being able to execute a vote in the rules process on the committee. That's a big deal in some of our sports, in particular football, where we have a 51 member option for a committee. We actually have 50 of the 51. That's where every state almost has a vote. So you want to be sure that your attention to following NFHS rules is part of your conversation when you make decisions. But there's no rush. I'm assuming the rule will be implemented and won't change unless adoption just goes horribly wrong and the committee says that didn't work, we're going to go back. So we'll see. Some folks may be ready to go 22, 23. Others may take a little bit longer, Depends on what their membership would like to do.
Very good. And I think that's pretty much all we have in the Q&A right now. So, Bruce.
Very good. I think that is all that we have in the Q&A. I appreciate all of your questions, all of your response today. It's been a great opportunity to get together and discuss these subjects. We do have a slide here which shows our contact information. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. I'll be glad to, and if you would like to do a one-on-one session, if you have some additional questions, would like to talk to Dr. Niehoff one-on-one, she's always very willing to do that. So contact us and let us know. Be glad to set you up with an additional interview. Again, we thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best. And feel free to reach out to us. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You see our social channels there. And thank you so much, and we will look forward to seeing you down the road. Have a good afternoon.
Take care, everyone.